Hello, nerds. The year of 2022 is rapidly coming to a close, and that means I need to update
my favorite books of 2022 list.
a couple months back. I think it was in May. I did sort of a half-year review of what my favorite books were of the year so far at that point. I think that list needs updated because it has a complete overhaul. With this list, I think recency bias tends to play a pretty big role in what you consider your favorite things of the year. So what I did was I ensured that on Goodreads, which I don't really use to write reviews anymore, I just use to rate the books and keep track of how many books I've read in a year, I made sure that I gave them 5 stars. As soon as I finish the book, I get my raw, immediate, emotional, disgusting, ugly, beautiful, the whole gauntlet of feelings, and I apply it to my star rating. These were all 5-star reads. So I can assure you that this list is valid. In either way, it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. These are my official 5 favorite books of the year 2022. I must also say, these are not in any particular order. They are just the group of 5 that are my favorite. In my head, they're all just kind of jumbled together as my favorite. So we will start with one that I don't think I've talked about on this channel before. If you know me personally, I've talked to you about it, and I'm sorry for belaboring the point if you're watching this. Hi. But Hex, what an absolute gem. I found this very interesting, a sort of subversive approach to horror, where typically in a horror novel, horror movie, whatever it might be, you're spending the whole time trying to figure out what that major threat is. But you know exactly what the threat is from like page 1 in this book. Essentially, there's this little town called Black Spring, and this 17th century witch who has her eyes and mouth sewn shut has been haunting this town for centuries. But the whole town is perfectly aware of it. They all know that she's there, and they essentially have to keep it a secret from certain sections of the government and the general outside world that they are kind of like harboring this cursed witch. Nobody's allowed in the town who are newcomers, with the exception of people who just continue to try to buy a house there, and nobody's really allowed out. If you're there, you kind of have to be there for life. And naturally, the kids, the teenagers of the town, grow very tired of this pattern, very tired of this routine, and start to sort of poke the metaphorical bear, which is a literal witch, and all the terrible things that the elders and people who have become very familiar with what the witch is capable of over time, they begin to see those things start to happen again, because these kids are messing with the witch and all hell breaks loose. This is such a great horror read. I read it in the dead of summer. I was still thinking about it in the fall, and here I am around holiday times and the winter, still thinking about it. Got 5 stars for me. Was definitely one of my favorite 5 books of 2022. The next book is another book that I read about a month after my original halfway point favorite books of 2022 video, and that is Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It is a small little mass market paperback, but it packs a heck of a punch. This book is huge, and it took me pretty long to read, but it didn't feel like it was taking long. And when you're reading 1,000 plus page book, and you know that it's taking long to read, but it doesn't feel like you're bored at any point and no part really drags, you know you like that book, and I definitely love this book. There's so much to tackle in talking about the Cosmere and all the different connections between Sanderson's work, and it's a lot to even talk about the multiple perspectives that are featured in this book. So I'm not going to get into a full-fledged review. You can check that out on my YouTube channel or over on Instagram. There are these massive planes that are shattered that people are warring on. You have people who are enslaved and coming up from the mud, and everything you can imagine is in this book. And it's definitely a worthwhile epic fantasy series that I look forward to continuing in 2023. Choice number 3, I don't have my physical copy. at the moment because I so heartily recommended it to my friends and anyone who would read it, so I could talk about it to them. Good old Stephen Graham Jones with My Heart is a Chainsaw. Again, absolutely lovely horror read. This was my first year getting acquainted with Mr. Stephen Graham Jones and his lovely work. I started with The Only Good Indians in the beginning of the year, and this was sort of like a mid-year read for me with My Heart is a Chainsaw, and it was amazing. You have this high schooler who's recently graduated, definitely a troublemaker and sort of viewed as an outcast in her hometown because she's absolutely obsessed with horror, the history of horror, slasher horror, and suddenly, after graduating from high school, it looks like a slasher in real life is starting to take place in her hometown. But given her standing in the community, nobody really believes her or takes note of any of the suspicious things going on. And next thing you know, you have a full-scale slasher horror unfolding before your eyes. Not only that, but the sequel is set to come out in early 2023, which I absolutely cannot wait to read. Number 4, some people might be upset that I even started this because of the amount of warnings I got before I started it, but Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind. And I know, if you've read this book, I know you don't need to warn me. You think he's never going to finish the series. You know what? I would read this. I know there's cliffhangers. There's things you need to know after this book. And the next, like, 1.5, I guess there's like 2.5 books out because one of them is the sequel and the next one is like 2.5, so to speak. But, yeah, I get it. It's an amazing book. People are very butthurt that he hasn't finished the series yet. If it never comes out, so be it. I love Name of the Wind. It's definitely one of my favorite books of 2022 because, well, it's just, the characters are so great. The magic school is amazing. Anytime there's a magic school involved, you're gonna love it. Characters that are very easy to root for, that hold an immense amount of power that is just waiting to be explored. Absolutely love Name of the Wind. In my 5th and final pick is the only one that carried over from my mid-year favorite books of 2022 list. But it was actually a two-way tie between these. So we have a tie for the number 5th place. Obviously, I talked about this one in my mid-year review video, but The Two Towers. Not often people's favorite in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's usually The Fellowship or Return of the King. I don't always hear people having Two Towers as their favorite, but this one was definitely my favorite. I absolutely loved The Two Towers. I talked about it in the other video. You can check that out to hear my full thoughts on it. But Two Towers, the only one to carry over. And its tie, another sort of middle book in a fantasy series, Clash of Kings, in the Song of Ice and Fire series. This is definitely the most action-packed, the most shocking, craziest book in the Game of Thrones series. If you need to revisit this after watching the show at any point, or if you haven't started reading the books or you don't even plan to, I think reading the first 3 books is worth it because this is the 3rd book. Everything is leading up to the events of Clash of Kings, and if you've watched the show, if you're familiar with the books, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where literally no character that is high ranking in the Game of Thrones universe or any character that you care about is safe at this point. And it's devastating, but it's absolutely riveting. This was an amazing read. And again, we have another fantasy series that possibly won't be finished. I don't care. Clash of Kings made it completely worth reading, in my opinion. So this was number 5 for me, along with The Two Towers. Those were my 5/6 favorite books of 2022. I'd love to hear what your favorite reads of 2022 were, and look out soon for my most anticipated reads of 2023. Let me know what your favorite books were this year down in the comments. Leave a like, subscribe. We'll see you next time, nerds. Later.